Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend and Publish, and welcome to episode 101, Movement and Completion. It's December 2022 when this episode is being recorded, and there's a lot of focus on developing a word of the year. So if you're not familiar with this concept, you pick some kind of word to focus your efforts for the year. It might be something like health or family, or it could be something that is, maybe a mission that you have. So for example, reset, or even the word focus could be one of those words. And I kind of enjoyed the exercise that I did in a workshop a couple of days ago where I had to pick a word of the year for next year. And for the record, I actually didn't pick just one. I decided to think about a word in terms of writing and academic writing, and how could I use a word of the year, if we want to make it that catchy thing, to help me guide my writing decisions. Because for me, if I have some kind of a word of a year, I would want to use it as a touch point to decide, am I doing this or am I not doing this? And the two words I chose, a little spoiler alert, are movement and completion. And I really like these two words because to me, they are not as pressure filled as something like the word health or submit. I heard somebody else in this workshop actually use submit as their word of the year, where they're actually going to submit a whole bunch of projects. That's great, I guess, but that's probably a lot of pressure for some people that are not ready to submit, or you're just starting out on a project. So I like the words movement and completion because to me, they guide my academic decision making in two different ways. And these are also words that I didn't know I was doing it at the time, but I've really focused my efforts on trying to think through these two decisions every time I sit down in a writing session. And so I thought we'd take just a second to kind of walk through these two words, and maybe they'll be helpful for you in the new academic year. But I'm thinking about movement because to me, movement in scholarly writing means I'm touching this project a couple times a week. So that might not be every day. I've already talked on this podcast a couple of times about everyday writing and how that works for some people, but not others. And sometimes the pressure, of course, having to write every day is certainly too much for some people. Other people's schedules don't allow it. But in any event, I don't write every day. I know I've mentioned that I write weekday mornings, 2 hours on the weekday mornings, because that's the time I have. I don't write on weekends. And that's just kind of where I am at this particular moment in life. But I do want to touch my writing projects several times a week. So for me, movement means, am I doing some writing on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday? So that would be my first question am I actually opening up a writing project? I'm actually sitting with it. I'm actually typing some words out. I might be looking up some information about my project. I might be revising a paragraph. It doesn't necessarily matter what it is I'm doing, as long as I'm having contact with that project. So to me, that's what movement looks like. So here would be another example. A couple of weeks ago, I got really, really busy, and just a few things random things interrupted morning writing, things that were outside of my control, like a home repair and a workshop I had to go to for health insurance and that kind of thing. On those days, I wasn't really getting any movement. And I know by day 3, I was kind of like, I really got to get back to this. I normally don't miss a Monday and a Tuesday. What's happening here? And so I used movement for that Wednesday session to kind of get into some writing, even if it was just within 10 minutes between a meeting. I thought about, what can I do to just open this project up and not lose what I was working on? So to me, that's a way to get movement. Another way I get movement is I actually work through kind of capturing ideas and recording what I'm working on in the Penzu online writing journal. And I know I've pumped Penzu a lot. I promise I will take a break after this episode. I just really am liking what this tool is doing for me. But that's the other way I make sure I get some movement, is I keep notes of where I am on various projects in there. I also have mentioned I used Asana for big project management planning, but I use the Penzu journal for more day-to-day stuff. What am I working on today? What am I working on tomorrow? And so for me, that's a way to make sure I get some movement, because I know what to do. I have some options laid in front of me. So I know in a recent episode, it was called Give Yourself a Choice. I'll link to it in the show notes. that was one way that I could do that. That's a way to get movement, is I only gave myself 2 choices and I have to choose one. So that's a way to get some movement. The other word, completion, though, for me, is that when I'm choosing between writing tasks, all other things being equal, a question I frequently ask myself is, will this writing task get me closer to this project's completion? Because we do have to move forward with writing. We can't just keep writing in circles. We can't just revise endlessly. All kinds of deadlines are there for conference proposals, dissertations. At a certain point, your data will be out of date. So you've got to put some things out there. So moving towards completion for me really takes the form of 3 different things. All things being equal, I'll try to choose the tasks that give me the biggest bang for my buck, meaning, what are the things that are going to help this project the most to get it closer to a completed stage? And for me, a lot of times those are questions about argument. Have I kept my argument clear? Have I kept it as a narrative through line? So do I have actually like a story that my research is telling? That's always one I look at. Another one I always look at is organizational structure. If I was a reader and I was just running through a database trying to find an article on X, whatever my topic is, can I find out from the title? Can I find out from section headings? Do I have good keywords? Is this a skimmable article? And that's sad to say. I think we would all like people to read our articles in depth or our book chapters in depth, but the reality is a lot of the ways people will access our research is not from that standpoint. They might just be getting it for a quick skim read. So I do try to pay attention to those audience reader friendly things in combination with organization. So I will take a look at organization. So that can be a second thing. And then a third thing towards looking for completion, one of the things I will do is frequently go back to where I plan to ultimately submit the chapter or the article or the book proposal and refamiliarize myself with guidelines and then double check my work against those guidelines. So this is something that I can't do once, I have to do it many times. So in terms of working towards completion, that's another way that I do that. But I find if I have those 2 questions in my mind, if we just frame these as very 2 simple questions, how can I get movement today on writing, even though we're not writing every day, but whenever your writing sessions are, if they're 4 times a week, you sit down in a writing session, how can I get movement today on my writing project? So figuring out what tasks I'm going to do, and then going ahead and actually getting in there and starting to move. I'm physically moving. It's either my fingers or it's my eyeballs, or I'm listening to some content or something to develop that writing project. And then the second one is, what can I do out of all of my choices available to get this piece of writing closer to completion? So if I think of movement and completion in combination, ideally, all of our movement choices will contribute to completion, ideally. But that's not the case. I mean, there are some times where we have to work out things in writing that will never be used, or in the event, say we submit an article and we get rejected and we have to find a new journal, some of that previous movement wasn't moving us towards completion, at least not towards that particular journal. But that doesn't mean that it can't happen again. And I like the idea that movement and completion here are very fluid concepts. They go over and over. You need both of them on every project that you'll do, even if some completed projects are projects that are completed maybe only for you or not for necessarily a published audience. Maybe they'll be completed for a presentation or something like that. So I really like those 2 concepts, and I encourage you to think about whatever words you could use as a guiding choice. So for example, if I come into a writing session, I'm really scrambled, maybe I only have 45 minutes instead of my usual 2 hours, I want to sit down and say movement and completion. What can I do to move this project right now, get some writing done on it? And what can I do to move it towards completion to get some writing completed? What would get it closer to the completed stage? So hopefully those 2 concepts helped you. And in the spirit of sharing, I want to make sure that I take a minute here and share a resource that I think would be really helpful working with both movement and completion. It's one of our resources from the Textbook and Academic Authors Association, one of our podcast sponsors. So at the moment, if you're watching this on YouTube, you've just gotten to see my lovely, lovely face in the library talking to you. If you're looking at or listening to it on audio, you don't necessarily need to see the screen. I'm going to share the resource that I'm talking about, but I will also describe it. And so I've mentioned before how much I love the Textbook and Academic Authors Association. You'll hear a lot about them this year, but I want to point out a resource that I actually use, because I've mentioned many times that I only allow sponsors of things that I actually use. And I love in their section, it's underneath resources, and then it's called Resources for Academic Writers. There is a great template that I think would really help us work towards movement and completion. And it basically is this last one here. It's called Your Writing Working Preferences, Questions to Help You Write More Effectively. And a lot of these questions get you to a state where you can actually move and complete work. So I'm going to pop that up on the screen for a second so people can see this. But it basically is an inventory of some questions you can ask yourself before we start the new calendar year. And so one of them was just a question about, do I work better in 1 hour or 3 hour sessions? I like the idea of revisiting time use in writing sessions, because what worked before in one particular semester around your classes might not work again in another semester when you have a totally different class schedule. So it's questions like that. And I like this because I think it sets us up for success. There's lots of questions in there. It asks, about times of preferences for writing, where you do your best work, all those kinds of things that if you haven't revisited these in a while, this is a way to figure out how you could get some movement. I know, for example, if we just think about the movement question for a second, I am doing much more writing in the morning, even though that's not my preference. I like to write in the afternoons. I definitely am an after lunch kind of a writer, which I know is rare, but that is my true preference in time. But I know that my day is much more likely to get interrupted. So I have to write in the morning. That's when I'm most likely to get some action done on my writing. But I'm also closer to getting more of it done and probably getting it closer to being completed because I've just got more of a time window in there. So I like this inventory as a way to just look at what your writing looks like this semester and what it could look like in the spring of 2023. I'm hoping these questions will be really useful to you. And there's lots of great things in here. Sometimes there's writing logs, there's worksheets, there's all kinds of spectacular details in there. Definitely check out our show notes and you can see the discount code that Textbook and Academic Authors Association offers Defend and Publish listeners. But it's a pretty reasonable resource, and there's just a bank of videos and all kinds of other things. So as mentioned on previous episodes, I'll share one of these at the end of every episode, and you can check these out if you think they're of use. But I like this one because it's simple questions, but they're not that simple. They let you really look at that spring semester to figure out, what could I do to kind of fine tune my writing and make me write more effectively. So hopefully this helps, and happy writing, everyone. I hope you get a chance to look at your own movement and completion habits.